Hello and welcome back to this episode of In Lay Terms. I'm your host, Payman Ascari, and today we have back with us Mr. Jason James. Hey, Jason.
Hey, Payman, it's good to be back, man. I felt bad. I felt like we just got going in our last conversation, and I had to cut it short. So I'm happy to have another shot at this with you.
Yeah, it's never good when you cut short just a topical conversation about
That's right.
immigration policy. It's nothing too deep.
That's right. That's right.
Jason, I don't know. I guess like we left it off with immigration, but maybe if you could retell your story for the audience from kind of beginning to end when you grew up to Richmond and how things changed.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in Richmond, British Columbia. My family, we moved there when I was, I want to say, 3 or 4 years old. It was still just a small little fishing village, a place where, you know, recently immigrants who had recently arrived in the country and single moms and lower income families could get a nice place, rent a nice place for dirt cheap. We were over the bridge. Nobody in Vancouver cared about us. We would go to the city and tell people we were from Richmond, and they would look at us like we were aliens. you know and somewhere around, and again, like, this is just when I noticed it. I've had a lot of people point out that it started much earlier, but for me, it was around 1995 when I noticed that there was like a sudden flood of people from Hong Kong and mainland China coming into Richmond. And by the end of 1996, the town that I grew up in had completely changed. And the modest family homes had been torn down. Big giant mansions had been erected in their place. All of the wooded areas and the parks that we used to play in were gone. They were developed into condominiums. And it was quite evident to anybody who was paying attention that there was a massive money laundering operation happening. But at that time, because it was so unknown, it was viewed as being like a racially sensitive topic, right? To speak out about it meant you were a racist and you were anti-Chinese and so on and so forth. And that's kind of how that went, all the way until the early to mid 2000s, until it was like plainly clear what was happening. And the RCMP started investigating certain business people who were involved in Richmond, and there were a number of underground casinos in operation. There were a number of birthing homes in operation, and birthing homes are basically places where pregnant Chinese nationals would go and live until they had children. And because by Canadian law, if you have a child on Canadian soil, then that child is a Canadian citizen. And what these women were, most of them, is they were money mules for CCP members to launder their money into Canada. And, eventually, of course, what happened was we all got priced out of our neighborhoods, right? Like, all of the people that I grew up with no longer live where we grew up. Right. And that's not because they, wanted to live elsewhere. It was literally because they couldn't afford to live in the neighborhood we grew up in anymore. And, now in 2024, I mean, I think it's kind of painfully obvious what's happened in our country. And I am not proud to say that it all started in Richmond, British Columbia.
Why is it that all bad things start in this province?
I don't know, man. I think maybe it has to do with something, for some reason, I guess maybe being a port of entry. BC has always been very lax in terms of the way that it polices narcotics, right? Whether that's smuggling or using or dealing, right? I just think that BC has always been an easy target. And I think that there have always been politicians in BC who are willing to play the game with Chinese organized crime that is inevitably tied to the Chinese Communist Party. And there are a lot of people in BC politics, Christy Clark namely, who became very, very, very wealthy during that period, right? From 2000 until about 2010, 2015. And yeah, I just think it's a mixture of lackadaisical policing, an apathetic public, and corrupt politicians that turned BC into what it is now.
So I kind of want to leave the criminality part until the end.
Sure.
We'll build up to that. I want to talk about the immigration aspect, specifically change. Like immigrants come in, if more immigrants come in than the country can assimilate, you
Mhm.
get rapid change. Like, how do you think countries should evolve? How should they grow? Should it be purely natural growth? Um, because I've heard this criticism a lot from other people too. Like they say immigrants are coming in, they're wiping out farmland, and they're building condominiums. So, in your view, what would be the right way to handle population growth?
I mean, I think immigration is a great thing, right? My wife is Filipina. Her mom immigrated to Canada 40 years ago. She worked, as a maid in the Hyatt hotels for 40 years, recently retired, right? I wouldn't, my children wouldn't exist. I wouldn't be married. I wouldn't have my wife if her mom hadn't immigrated from the Philippines, right? So, immigration is a great thing. I think it's necessary, right? The biggest pushback I always get from people online is that multiculturalism is dangerous. In essence, it's not, right? I mean, even where I live now in Alberta, we've had a sudden surge of immigrants coming in from Africa, and it's been beautiful. I have a lot of Nigerian neighbors from Cameroon, Kenya, other places. I think if you want to go somewhere and you're looking to create a better life for yourself and your family, and you're aware of the culture that you're joining, and you take an active role in assimilating to that culture, it's beautiful. It's amazing, right? But like what we've seen in Europe with a lot of the Muslim immigrants, what we see in Canada now, particularly in Alberta with a lot of the Indian immigrants, is that a lot of their religious and political issues are being imported with them, right? Like here in Calgary recently, we had a massive brawl in the streets with like I can't remember the number. It was something insane. It was like 300 people, Punjabi and Khalistani factions, groups that had clashed in the streets, right? And that's when it's like, okay, I think, and this is going to sound very rudimentary and basic, but I think the law should be if you bring your shit here, if you engage in organized crime or terrorism of any kind, or you bring your political issues or your social disagreements into this country, we just send you back. Period. No tolerance, right? And I'll go back to you, right? Because you're Iranian. Your parents arrived here. I'm sure that they had political views and perspectives from growing up where they did, and the Islamic fundamentalist revolution that occurred that drove them out, right? Imagine if like, your parents and like 15 other groups of families were fighting Islamic fundamentalists in the streets, and people were getting caught in between it, right? You know what I mean? It's not fair to the community that already exists. I just feel, as somebody who has lived other places, I feel like when you arrive, it is your job to become part of the culture. And you can inject the good parts of you into it, but leave the bad shit at home. And that's the problem with Canada, is that we bend over backwards to make everybody feel comfortable when we really shouldn't be. The attitude should be, join us. You're more than welcome to come here, find yourself a great job, build a beautiful life for your family. But no tolerance, right? You sell drugs or rape somebody or kill somebody, or just have a massive brawl in the streets with a separatist group that you disagree with, we put you all on a plane and you all go home and you never come back. It's that simple.
So, for the audience that's listening in and they think that what you said was really harsh, what we're talking about here is a probationary period, right?
I think permanent. I don't care how long you've been here, right? If you immigrate to a country and you sell drugs, which is what we've seen in BC, right? The fentanyl epidemic in BC is 100% the result of the Chinese Communist Party in collusion with Mexican cartels. Okay? I don't care if you've been here for 20 years. If you are caught selling fentanyl and you are not a born and raised Canadian, you get put on a plane and you get sent home. I don't care if you arrived when you were 3 years old. You go home. And I know that sounds extremely harsh, but that's how we have to handle this, right? Now, it's not to say that Canadians aren't involved in this, right? But if you're Canadian, you go to prison, you go to jail, right? With this fentanyl issue that we're dealing with in BC, you're in BC, you see it. I saw it. I was just telling somebody the other day, and maybe I don't know if I told this story on the last episode, but 3 days before I left BC, I had a junkie defecate on my front lawn in Richmond, right? We have people dying in droves of overdoses in the Lower East Side of Vancouver because we have a safe supply program that is an utter disaster, right? We had no plan for treatment. We had no plan to open up new treatment facilities to get people into detox and to get people to treatment. And I have people close to me who are drug addicts, who were addicts, who tried desperately for years to get into treatment, because here's the secret. Most drug addicts don't want to be drug addicts. Most of them want to get clean, but they need help. That help is not available to them, right? And here we have Chinese organized crime, which Sam Cooper has brilliantly proved on many occasions, that are bringing in just fentanyl by the boatload in collusion with Mexican cartels on the other side of the border, right? Those people, if they are not Canadian citizens born and raised, I do not care how long you have been here. I don't care. You get caught doing that, zero tolerance, no second chances. You go home. You go back to wherever it is your parents came from. And that's not just Chinese people. That's everybody. I don't care if you're American. We have a real problem. We have real problems in this country now, right? And I'm not saying immigration is a bad thing. Again, I will go back to my original statement. I think it's a beautiful thing. I think it's amazing that I can walk down the street and talk to my neighbors from the Caribbean, talk to my neighbors from Africa, talk to my neighbors from Syria, right? And hear all these beautiful different stories and all these languages and all these, and experience all these different cultures just within a 2-block radius of my home. But you know what all these people have in common? They're all trying, man. They're all trying to be part of this. They're all contributing. They're all going to work every day or starting their own businesses or whatever it is. They came here to pursue a dream, and that's what they're going after. That's beautiful, man. I love that story, right? And those people are more than welcome to have children here for generation after generation after generation and thrive just like your family did. But we are reaching a critical point here in Canada and in the United States where we have to start to look at this realistically. And if people are coming here and raping and killing, like I just read a story the other day about a guy from Venezuela who was in California and he got picked up by the police. He's a pedophile. He's a child rapist. He got picked up. Can't remember on what. I don't know. I don't think it was on rape charges. And instead of sending him back to Venezuela, they sent him to Boston, where he got picked up in Boston for raping a child. That's what we're doing.
Why Boston?
I don't know. But they sent him to Massachusetts. That's what we're doing, right? And the problem is not going to be solved unless we take a hard line stance on this and say, look, you come here. If I went to the United States or Mexico and I got caught selling drugs, or I got caught running an illegal gambling ring, or anything, sex trafficking, I would expect to be put on a plane and sent back to Canada in the best case scenario. Worst case scenario, they just line me up and shoot me. And there are a lot of places in the world like that, right? I don't know why it's on us to have an infinite amount of patience for people who want to come to our country and do damage. I don't know why it's on us to have that type of patience. If anything, we should be the most guarded place in the world. North America, Canada, and the United States, maybe not anymore, but for a long time, we're the best place to be. The best place to be. It was the place where people around the world were lining up to get to. There are still to this day people standing in line to get here. So why are we tolerating this bullshit? There are honest people out there who are desperate to get here. Honest people in war-torn countries. Honest people who are being governed by Islamic fundamentalists who are desperate to get here and just live a happy life. Why are we making them stand in line while we're letting these people, other people in, to do damage, to be criminals, and to rape and kill and pillage? There should be zero tolerance. And that line will move faster. And once we do that, it sends a clear message to everyone else. You're more than welcome to be here. You're more than welcome to join us and be part of our community. But for lack of a better phrase, you fuck around and find out. And that has to be the attitude.
Let me rephrase what you said. Your sort of your immigration suggestion. If you're born in Canada and if you commit a crime, we're stuck with you. We'll throw you in jail, but then after we have to let you stay. But if you're not born in Canada and you come here and commit a crime, not only will we throw you in jail, we'll kick you out afterwards.
That's
Like
right.
it's
And again, I'm not talking about jaywalking here, right? You don't go home if you get a speeding ticket, right? What I'm talking about is if you're selling kilos of cocaine, or if you rape a child or a woman, or you commit a violent crime, yeah, you go home. No tolerance, zero tolerance, none. That has to be the attitude. Otherwise, Canada's justice system is not designed to hold people in prisons, right? That's why you see every day people are outraged because somebody is caught with child pornography on their computer and they get like a $300 fine because we're easy on crime. And if we're going to take that approach, if we're going to take this approach where it's like, oh, that's okay, you got caught, with a kilo of fentanyl in the trunk of your car, and we're going to give you a year in prison and then 2 years probation. Well, that's not sending a message to anybody. All it's telling people, the thing that we have to remember is a lot of these people come from places where life is much harder. So a year in a Canadian prison with cable TV, great food, a nice yard to walk around in and lift weights in, that's nothing to these guys. It's nothing. They'll do it over and over and over again. So we have to send that message. You come here, you do something that presents a serious danger to the society that you're a part of, you go home.
Let's go back to your you're talking about that brawl in Alberta. I think it was in Indians and Sikhs, but let's just say it was two factions of Iranians. So we don't get accused of racism because I'm Iranian. So
let's play it safe.
Yeah. I don't want this video getting insta deleted from YouTube.
That's right.
So we bring him in and we have the sticks. The sticks are, if you commit a crime, we're bouncing you out.
That's right.
When I came here in the late 80s, there were carrots. Like we had an ESL teacher that went to me and said, Payman, you can't talk to the other Iranian students. I want you to talk to the Canadian students. Integration, assimilation.
Right.
That's gone. Like the concept of multiculturalism as a virtue is eroded that. So besides the sticks, what are your suggestions for carrots to encourage people to integrate and not get into brawls?
Yeah, I mean, I think small business subsidies are a great way, right? A lot of people arrive here with ideas, right? Encouraging those ideas. I think too often what we do is we shuffle really brilliant people from other places into bullshit jobs, right? Into jobs where they don't have to use their intelligence. I talked to a neighbor of mine the other day. She's from India and she's a doctor, right? And she's currently applying to go to the US because she would have to basically start over again here in Canada, right? Why are we making her do that, right? She's been working at Walmart since she got here. She's a doctor. And we have a shortage of doctors in this country. So why are we making her jump through hoops? What I'm saying is, in that case, maybe there should be some sort of general testing just to see some general knowledge test, to make sure that she's up to speed, right? But in a lot of cases, these doctors from India are better than Canadian doctors, right? My doctor, my GP is from Africa. Brilliant guy. So lucky I found him as my doctor, right? And he told me too, like he had to jump through hoops in order to be a doctor in Canada. It's extremely difficult to come from somewhere else and find a job in the field in which you are educated, right? I talked to another neighbor of mine. He's Filipino. He's a civil engineer from the Philippines. They are making him take his education over again here in Canada. And in the meantime, do you know what he's doing? He's working at Dairy Queen, right? So on the flip side of that, what we need to do is we need to loosen the tethers a little bit, right? If this guy's a civil engineer, there should be some form of general knowledge test that he can take to make sure that he is what he says he is, right? I get that when it comes to doctors, we want to make sure that the people that we're hiring as doctors are actually doctors. But there's a way to figure that out without making these doctors start over again, right? And they don't do that in the United States. Like I said, this neighbor of mine, she's applying to American hospitals because it's just too difficult for her. She doesn't have the money. to go to school again here. She spent everything she had to get here. So in that case, what we should be doing is we should be providing a path for educated people or even uneducated people, right? You know, if you come here and you want to start a corner store, there should be some sort of program to help immigrants get into the fields of their choosing, right? And I think too often what happens is people come here and they're just immediately forgotten, right? It's like you're here now. It's like everything's moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour and we just throw them into the deep end and go. And, you know, that's also a recipe for failure too, right? So what we should be doing is we should, like I said, we should be subsidizing people but I think for Canadians in general, I think Canada is a place that does not encourage entrepreneurship. It doesn't encourage dreamers, right? It's like, you know, go to school, go to college, get a job, sit in your cubicle for 40 years, get your watch at retirement and die, right? So we need to be encouraging dreamers, period. But that includes immigrants. And that's the flip side of that, right? When people come here and they want to do well and they want to provide a better life for their family, we should have some sort of avenue for them to do that.
Thank you for that.
I know we pulled it back, didn't we?
Yeah, that was a good response. I wanted to. So we're making our way towards the criminals aspect of drugs. What I'm going to ask is very controversial right now because of two reasons. One, the Alberta court case with the Coots 2 now.
Sure. Yep.
And the other one with whatever is going on with the RCMP playing cover for the Trudeau administration.
Yep.
Somebody was telling me a story about how there's massive amounts of drugs going across the Coots border and the RCMP is involved. What do you think the likelihood of that is?
I think it's highly likely. Look at what we're seeing, right? Look at what we're seeing with this foreign interference investigation. We know for an absolute fact that there are 11 sitting members in our parliament who have accepted money and other things from the CCP, who are positioned and purposely installed by a foreign government. There are 11 of them that we know for sure. Guarantee you it's more. And nothing's being done. Every press conference that Chrystia Freeland or Justin Trudeau is in currently, they're asked questions. Are you going to reveal the names of these people? Are you going to reveal who they are? And they won't. Well, the only reason they're not going to reveal who these people are is because it's going to incriminate them. And there's no way that something this big, this massive, can exist without the cooperation of CSIS and the RCMP. You know, I talk to Sam Cooper regularly, and our last episode together, we talked about a 53-room mansion that was busted in Markham, Ontario, which was operating as an underground casino. And it was busted by the York Regional Police, right? RCMP weren't the ones investigating it. It was regional police. When they went in, they were in full flak jackets and had their faces, their identities obscured. They were wearing balaclavas. Why? Because they were afraid of whatever they knew who they were dealing with. So whoever they were dealing with, they were well aware they were highly volatile, violent, and more dangerous than even they were. This is the police who are afraid in Canada. Well, what they discovered was that the person who was operating this underground casino was a Chinese gangster, a guy by the name of Wei Wei, with ties, who sat on the board of directors for the An Hui Friendship Association. And the An Hui Friendship Association is directly connected to the CCP. And when they went in, they discovered videotapes of politicians in compromising positions inside of this underground casino. So you can use your imagination and guess what those politicians are doing on camera. So what they uncovered was what looked like a blackmail and bribery scheme ran by Chinese gangsters on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party. The York Regional Police passed the tapes off to CSIS because they realized that they were onto something much bigger than what they had busted. And Canada's intelligence agency sat on a warrant for the casino and the people involved for months on end. Eventually, the case got thrown out because the man who was operating the casino claimed that there was $450,000 in watches that were stolen. just claimed it. Not only were the charges against him and everybody involved dropped, but the video evidence of Canadian politicians being compromised in some form, way, shape, or form were returned to him. That man eventually left Canada and went somewhere in the Caribbean with all of that video evidence. It's gone. We'll never know what was on those tapes.
There's so much there.
Yeah.
What time period are we talking about here?
This is I think the casino was busted in 2022 or 2023.
So Trudeau, during Trudeau's era.
So, yeah, this is under Trudeau. Yeah.
And
and by the way, the same people who were involved in the underground casino also ran fundraisers for Justin Trudeau and the Liberals.
Yeah, this is such a big story. Is there evidence of this? Like, is there a court trial, court transcript?
If people watching this are interested in reading about it and getting into the details, you can go to thebureau.news. That's Sam Cooper's publication. So just to kind of put things in perspective here, Sam Cooper's reporting is currently being used by the Pentagon in the United States to investigate Chinese influence in their country. So this isn't like a blog post from some dude. This is Sam Cooper, probably the top investigative journalist in our country. So if they want, they can either if they want to read, they can go to thebureau.news, or they can listen to my last episode. I think it's episode 39 of the Brave New Normal podcast with Sam Cooper. We go into it for an hour and a half. Sam breaks it all down.
Okay. So the audience can go there for more information.
Yeah.
Is this something completely unusual to Canadian politics, or like have the Hells Angels been doing this for a while? Like I referenced Picton Farm, for example.
From my experience, so I'm from Richmond, but I grew up around East Vancouver. That was where I hung out, right? So I had a lot of interactions with Hells Angels and other, gangs. There's definitely like local police officers who run cover for those guys, but it's very low level, right? That's why these guys are buying helicopters and flying them over the border. The difference here is that this Chinese organized crime syndicate and its connections to the CCP have made it so that they don't have to do any of that. They don't have to buy helicopters and fly drugs over the border or hide them, in containers on ships as they come into the port of Vancouver. They just walk it in because they own our government, right? And, it's never been confirmed what's on those videotapes, but I would estimate that sexual blackmail has played a large role in this, right? And that's what we're dealing with, right? That's what we're dealing with. And there's a reason why Trudeau and the Liberals will not disclose the names of the 11 sitting MPs who are proven to have connections to the CCP. The reason for that being is because once they open that can of worms, it's going to implicate a lot of people, including Justin Trudeau, right? Again, I'll go back to what I said. The people involved in that underground casino also ran fundraisers for Justin Trudeau and are donors to the Liberal Party, right? So, look, this is pure speculation, but if you connect the dots, it looks like what these people are doing is they are bribing our politicians, right? Whether it be via blackmail or just donations to their party. That's how this is working, and this goes right to the very top.
I'm not doubting you. I'm just saying a lot of the people in the audience are going to come at this and be like, "This is a conspiracy theory." So I'm trying to walk through this. Is this self-preservation where Justin Trudeau's like, I don't want to go to jail, so he's pressuring the RCMP? Or is this the RCMP coming and saying, listen, you're going to go to jail, so I want you to increase our budget $1 billion next year?
I mean, in terms of the RCMP, I think what's happening on that level, ignoring the Coots border, but just in terms of the politics, I think what's happened is that the RCMP and our intelligence agency, CSIS, have realized how big this is, and that if what's actually happening is revealed or exposed, that it could destroy our institutions, like, period, right? Like it would flip our entire political structure upside down. And I think that's the fear. The fear is that what has happened is so big that they can't. It's like the economic collapse in 2008, right? It was so big, the devastation was so monumental that Barack Obama really didn't have a choice but to bail out the banks and Wall Street. Because if he hadn't of, the damage would have just been, I mean, it just would have been irreparable, right? Now, in my opinion, I think there were other ways around that. I think you could have insured all the people who stood to lose their life savings and millions of dollars and let the banks and Wall Street fail. But in this case, what do? Right? You reveal that, I mean, the Liberal Party itself is receiving, tens of thousands, if not millions of dollars in donations from agents for the CCP, right? And groups that are directly connected via the United Front Work Department. What does that do to us? What does that do to our institutions, right? We'd have to clean house. And I think, so in terms of like what's happening on the Coutts border, I think that's more just straightforward, right? That's more just, envelopes full of cash under a table for certain people to look the other way. And that's always happened. I mean, I grew up in Vancouver. You're in Vancouver. I remember the 90s when cocaine showed up by tons. I mean, you could jump off of City Hall and swim through cocaine in 1998. That cocaine didn't end up in BC because a bunch of criminals were really, really smart. It ended up because there were a whole lot of people being paid on the back end and under the table to look the other way, right? And I think that's potentially what's happening here.
I got so many follow-up questions, but before I'm gonna ask you a question about your integrity, Jason.
Sure.
James. Let's say you are a judge, and evidence comes before you that the prime minister, forget Trudeau, any prime minister has sexually assaulted a minor, like a 12-year-old girl,
right?
Violently assaulted her, and if this gets out, it could lead to revolution. Thousands of people on the streets killing each other. What would you do? Would you suppress that, or would you do your duty?
I would do my duty, just because I think I have a different perspective on things. I think if something is big enough to launch a revolution, then we have to let it happen. Right? Look at where we are right now in this country. We talked a little bit before you and I started recording. I don't think you ever imagined being a podcaster. I certainly never imagined being on camera. I wrote under pseudonyms for most of my life because I didn't want to be a public person, but here I am. Right? We're here because all of this has been suppressed. We're only here because the general public is not aware of what's happening or has happened in their society, right? I mean, if all this goes away tomorrow, what do you and I end up doing, right? What do our conversations become? I think we have a responsibility to tell the truth. And these judges, especially people in the justice system or the political systems, they have a responsibility to the people to tell the truth, even if it means our institutions crumbling and we have to start over and we have to figure this out. We have to clean house. And maybe we move away from a parliamentary system. I mean, maybe it goes that far. Maybe we create a whole new system. Maybe we become a republic. But those are growing pains, right? You got to remember, our countries, the United States and Canada, are still really young, right? So we have a responsibility to purge these elements from our systems. We have no choice. So if a prime minister was caught with a 12-year-old girl in a hotel room and I'm a judge, I have a responsibility to the people to uphold the law and make sure that the people are aware, right? And that's the problem that we're facing, right? See, the other issue that we have is that we have a lot of judges who are tasked with reviewing transgressions on behalf of the Liberal Party, who also happen to be Liberal Party donors, who also happen to be future political candidates. So if your eyes are not on being a judge, but on being an MP, and something crosses your desk and you have to adjudicate a case, right, that involves Liberal Party members, where do your allegiances lie? To the Canadian people or to the party that you're trying to be a part of and eventually maybe someday lead?
Jason James for Chief Justice of Canada.
I'll be right there with you, Payman. Prime Minister Payman, Chief Justice Jason.
Yeah.
We'll set everything right.
Two guys who have no idea what the hell they're doing.
Exactly. That's right.
Jason, my other question was on the issue of the RCMP versus CSIS. Do you believe? I've talked to a couple of people, and they're saying it almost feels like CSIS is trying to do the right thing, and RCMP is the one that's trying to cover it up. What's your perspective?
I think they're fairly correct. I think CSIS knows what's happening, but I also think that there are people inside who share that view of like, if the Canadian public knows how bad this is, we might not have a country, right? And I think they're afraid. I think there's also, people in the intelligence community that are controlled by the Liberal government. I think the RCMP most definitely are, right? I mean, we've had proof of that, over and over and over again. But I think also, too, there's laziness involved. Look, until recently, we have never in this country dealt with stuff that we're dealing with now. I don't think our institutions are prepared, willing, or even capable of dealing with the things that we're up against, right? Canada, for the most part, for the longest time, has been largely a second-tier first world nation, right? We were always the diplomatic country between, people who are having disagreements, right? That's the role that we played on the world stage. We were good cop to America's bad cop, right? And now we're in a situation where we've realized that China has had a significant amount of influence, and also Iran, right, and Russia have had a significant amount of influence over a lot of our political decisions. But I would say China is the big one. And we're realizing how corrupt this government is, whether you're looking at ArriveCan or any of the other billion-dollar projects that return nothing. The carbon tax scheme, where I don't know if you read this, but a couple of weeks ago, who was it? I can't remember off the top of my head, but they were told by Stephen Guilbeault's office not to release the actual figures of how much carbon tax has been collected and where that money has gone because it's bad. So they're being silenced and censored. And that, I wish I could remember off the top of my head who it was, but they published the letter from Stephen Guilbeault on X, just basically showing the people like, look, this is what's happening. We don't have a balance. I can't show you the balance sheet for the carbon tax because the federal government has gagged me. So
sorry. The federal government gagged Stephen Guilbeault?
No, gagged. I wish I could. I'd pull it up on my phone right now. It's like the Auditor General, but it's the Canada. I can't remember who it is. But basically, he was tasked with maintaining the balance sheets. He's one of the people who maintains the balance sheets, right? And he had his quarterly carbon tax report, and he submitted it, and he wanted to release it. I guess part of it is they have to release it publicly, and Stephen Guilbeault's office, on behalf of the federal Liberal government, requested that he keep it private. Well, why would they keep it private? Why wouldn't they release those figures to the public? And the reason for that being is because if we knew where our carbon taxes are going, if we knew what it's costing us versus what we're getting in return, I think, again, that's something that could potentially spark a revolution. So we have this government that's just shrouded in secrecy, right? And we don't know how to deal with it because we've never dealt with it. Prior to Justin Trudeau, if you asked most Canadians who the prime minister was, they wouldn't be able to tell you, right? That's how asleep we've been for decades because we were afforded the luxury of it, right? For whatever reason in Canada, things just worked. And maybe there was a bit of corruption. There's corruption in every government, but maybe there was some corruption going on, but not enough to ring any alarm bells for anybody. But now, here we are, and I think that's the situation we're in. It's not necessarily corruption on the part of RCMP or CSIS or anybody in general. I think what it has to do with is these law enforcement people don't know how to deal with this. They don't know how to approach it, right? And I think as a result, there's laziness. because it's such a huge ball of wax that once you start chipping away at it, you're just going to be going forever. So I think they're reluctant to investigate to begin with for that fact.
Let's tighten up the language for the audience. When we say corruption, we're not just talking about money in brown envelopes. We're talking about like a judge that's interpreting the law however he likes.
That's right.
Or a law enforcement officer that's, wants to be promoted so they conceal evidence or
that's right.
Or suppress a case.
That's right. And sorry, man, I'm just bringing this up right now because I really want to share the gentleman's name and his role. Because it's something that flew way under the radar that nobody really paid any attention to, but is huge because, of course, if we can't release the balance sheets for the carbon taxes, then there's a reason for that, right? And that reason is because there's things happening with our tax dollars that we're not aware of. And oh yeah, so the PBO, the Parliamentary Budget Officer. If people want to look it up, they can go to Andy Lee. She did a lot on it on X. The Parliamentary Budget Officer, Yves Giroux. So he said he testified that the government has economic analysis on the negative impact on the carbon tax, and that his office was told explicitly not to disclose and reference it by Stephen Guilbeault's office. And there's audio recording of his testimony as well. So what I'm saying to you is this, right? The Parliamentary Budget Officer has the balance sheet, knows what's going on, and can't share anything publicly. Why? Well, you and I both know why, right? And again, I think what we're dealing with is so big and so devastating. I don't think we're going to realize how bad this is until Pierre Poilievre is prime minister. And then, of course, everything will be blamed on him, right? Because that's when the real pain will start, right? And he'll be dealing with the consequences of 9 years of a deeply corrupt and rotten Trudeau Liberal government.
What do you think is going to happen with Pierre Poilievre? Like, do you think it's going to be 8 years? He's going to serve his 2 terms, and he's going to be fixing the mess of the Liberal Party. At the end of the 8 years, people are going to be like, all right, you know what, that's enough. Let's vote the Liberals back in. I don't think Canada can survive that again.
I don't think so either. But I have a much more pessimistic view. I don't think he's going to be able to save it. Right? I think the situation we're in is so bad that nothing is going to save us. Like, we have let this go for way too long, right? We are in a situation where, the country has gangrene, right? And the more we let it go, the worse it gets, the more it spreads. I mean, the RCMP wrote a secret memo to the PMO earlier this year, warning them that once the Canadian public realizes how bad the situation is, that a revolution will inevitably be on the way. We're talking about revolution, right? We've never seen one of those in Canada, but we haven't seen one of those in the Western world in decades. And that's what the RCMP is warning the Canadian federal government about, that the situation is so bad economically that once Canadians figure out what's actually happening, there will be a revolution.
Just to be clear, when you say so bad economically, you also mean financially, like the mismanagement and the fraud.
That's right. The country's finances have been so mismanaged, right, that I don't think we're even at the tip of the iceberg. So with Poilievre, right, I mean, I think it's a given at this point, save for like dramatic foreign interference, which, I mean, they would have to literally hold Canadians at gunpoint, right, to get us to vote for Trudeau. And, look, I'm well aware that there's a strong probability of some gerrymandering going on in the background of this next upcoming election, right? Just like how Elections Canada lost 200,000 votes in the last election, right? There's going to be some things going on in the background, but I just don't think it's just impossible. He is so reviled and so hated that I don't think there's a chance of him winning. in 2025. So Pierre Poilievre inherits this mess. And I think when Pierre Poilievre actually opens up the books and gets a look at what was happening over the last 9 years, I think the job of saving this country is going to be so tremendous and so difficult, and it's going to be like sinking in quicksand. And I think that's the position he's going to be in. And I hope that he's able to pull off a miracle and get us out of this hole we're in. I just think we don't know how deep, and I don't even think he knows how deep it is. And he won't know until he's in there. And yeah, I mean, look, what's going to happen is we're going to sink further, and Canadians are going to blame the Conservative government when it's just literally just them trying to tread water and somehow get us out of this. I mean, look at ArriveCan, just that alone, right? We're talking, the number the last time I read it was up to like $64 million, right? We spent $250 million on GC strategies alone over the last 8 years. For what? Nobody knows, right? How many of those contractors and subcontractors are out there? It's not like GC Strategies was the only contractor that the federal government was hiring. There's got to be hundreds of them. So where's the carbon tax going? What's happening there? What's going on with the pension, with the CPP? Right? We have the World Economic Forum manages the CPP portfolio. The federal government introduced a second CPP. So this is the thing that people don't really know yet, is that if you look at your pay stub, most people are contributing to the CPP and CPP2. Why do we have a second CPP? Well, because the first one was mismanaged. Here's the thing that I think. We have a whole lot of people that are getting ready to retire. And I think MAID plays a big role in this. I think there's a reason why they rolled out MAID, because we have a whole lot of people that are going to retire, that are going to be taking pensions. And I think the money that's supposed to exist in the CPP isn't there. So they introduced the CPP2 to try to recover some of that money that's gone, but it's not nearly enough. And so, this is why we're hearing these horror stories of people with disabilities or people who are elderly being offered MAID in absence of treatment, right? Because the more people that you can get rid of, that's the more dollars that you can keep in that fund. And I think that's the level of trouble we're in. I think Danielle Smith sees the writing on the wall. She knows what it is, and that's why she's trying to launch the APP as quick as possible, right? And of course, there's another element attached to that, because once she launches the APP, then Alberta has to create its own tax bureau, and that is the first step towards separating, right? We collect and distribute our own taxes, right? Because as it stands right now, the federal government collects taxes on our behalf and then tells us how much we deserve back. And the West Coast, not just Alberta, but Saskatchewan, Alberta, and BC, we've been screwed for decades over this, right? But I think just in terms of the pensions, I think Danielle Smith is well aware of what's been going on. And I think that's the push toward the APP. And she just can't say it publicly because, of course, she'll be called a conspiracy theorist.
So let's simplify the concept of the CPP. It's a fund. So the pension fund, it's a fund, and you give like a percentage of your paycheck for 40 years, let's say 10% of your weekly paycheck. It goes in there, and then when you retire, it comes out. So the government is basically a fund manager, correct?
Yeah.
And there's a couple of ways that they could that money could maybe not there. Maybe they put it in a bad fund, a high risk fund, and the fund went bust, or they're stealing money from the fund. Which one do you think it is? And did I miss anything?
Yeah, I think they're stealing money from the fund, right? Why is the World Economic Forum managing the CPP? Right? We have a non-government globalist organization managing the futures of millions of Canadians. Why are they managing that portfolio? Well, I think it has to do with creating, it's like a shell game, right? You hire somebody else to manage the portfolio, you siphon cash out, right? And I think what happened is their greed just got the best of them. But I do also think that it is mismanagement of investments. Look at this EV battery, this EV manufacturing plant in Ontario. that thing is going to fail dramatically. You don't got to tell anybody twice, right? Nobody wants electric vehicles. Now Canada is trying to push to become a leader in electric vehicle. Again, it's another shell game, right? And that's the CPP fund is invested in that. So they're gambling the future of millions of Canadians on a product that nobody wants, that they're trying to force through, right? So the grand comedy of it all is that they've invested your future into this electric vehicle plant, and the way that they're going to justify their investment is in making you buy one, right? So that's what we're dealing with. That's what this is. And so, I just truly believe that it's mismanagement, siphoning cash away into, offshore accounts, and bad investments. And I just think that the CPP is not in even remotely the condition that we expect it to be. And I think when Pierre Poilievre gets in, that's going to be one of the big problems he's going to have to deal with. And how is he going to be able to do that without increasing taxes? Right? So what's going to happen is Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives, who are supposed to cut taxes, are going to have to come out and say, hey guys, we got to create some new taxes, and we got to do this because we're seriously deeply in the hole. And of course, Canadians don't understand that well, they do understand, but they don't want to hear that it's because everything was so badly mismanaged. They're just going to hear higher taxes, right? And that's what's going to turn the public opinion against him.
What do you think he's going to do with the CBC?
He won't defund it. He'll probably, what I would imagine is he'll just massively, cut their budget. I mean, to a point where they're probably one office in Ottawa with 4 people, managing a blog, right? I think that, it's funny because Canadians are very traditional, right? We have a very traditionalist sense of things. And so if the CBC was just altogether disappeared, I think like mainstream Canadians would be pretty upset about that, not because it's the CBC, but because they're a Canadian institution. And I think he knows that. So I think he would just cut their funding by like 95%, right? It still has to happen. I mean, I would like to see them disappear altogether. I mean, I'm in a very much an FAFO stage of my life, right? I really feel like we have to just stop having tolerance for all this stuff. Like I don't know if you read recently, but the CEO, is she the CEO? The CEO of CBC? I can't remember that lady's name. All of the millions of dollars in bonuses that she cut for herself and other executives there while they were laying people off, right? There should be no tolerance for that. Zero. Like we should go around, scoop up all the fentanyl dealers and put her on the same plane to wherever they're going, right? Like we're at this point where like it's so deep. And I don't know if you read, but recently I was reading that now there's also proof within this recent review of foreign interference that China and other foreign regimes have been influencing our media, right? Our media institutions have been, and come on, man. I mean, you can watch CBC and gather that. But what I'm saying is that all of our forward-facing institutions have been infiltrated by these foreign regimes and are being influenced by them. And the CBC is one of them.
Let me reframe that. Like, or it's kind of I'm pushing back on something here. This whole hysteria over China, Chinese interference. If we instead labeled it as foreign interference, when we have people like Jeffrey Epstein on Epstein Island,
sure,
like isn't the CIA just infiltrating Canada just like China is, and I don't know, World Economic Forum is?
But they have for a long time, right? Remember, most of our media here in Canada, most of the media we consume is American, and the CIA has been, conspiracy theory alert, CIA has been very active in American media for a long time, right? The difference is that we culturally and economically have the same interests, right? we've been propagandized by our own government for years via the CBC, CTV, Bell Media, right? It's not to say that we haven't been propagandized by Western nations or our own intelligence agencies. The difference is here we're being infiltrated and manipulated and used by a communist regime with global aspirations. Xi Jinping is a continuation of Chairman Mao's vision. Okay? That's the thing I want to get through to your audience. If you don't know who Chairman Mao is, then smarten up and go read about him, because he killed more people than any other dictator in recent history. And I'm talking last 200-300 years. 70 million dead. And he killed them because he wanted to turn China into a superpower. Xi Jinping holds the same outlook. He has the same perspective and the same belief. He will sacrifice you, your family, everybody to make China the global power. That's the goal and the aspiration. The only problem is he doesn't have the military might to do it, but we're giving it to him. Look at what we've done to the Canadian Armed Forces. Justin Trudeau has defunded them to a point where they almost don't exist. Look at what's happening to the American military. They're falling apart. You have guys in dresses leading the charge. That's all by design, man. And it's all cultural Marxism. Do you know where cultural Marxism comes from? It's Stalinism, just revamped and reshaped. And you know who did it? Chairman Mao. So that's what we're dealing with. Again, I keep saying that phrase, but that's what this is. And we can pretend it isn't. We could pretend there's other reasons, that there's a simpler solution, but there isn't. And look, like I said, Iran is involved in a lot of foreign interference in our country, as is Russia. And Russia colludes with China, right? What have we done over the last 5 years? What have the Western nations done? We've pushed China into Russia's arms. We've created an enemy so dangerous and so powerful, we don't even know how to deal with it. And what has China done is that they have infiltrated us via media, via drugs, via organized crime, via, you know what I mean? Completely via our government, right? We are completely on the hook now, right? And so, yeah, I mean, if you don't view China as that much of a threat, then I'm sorry to tell you, but you're sadly mistaken. And it's and that is a mistake that you will live to regret. I promise you. What we are going toward, I'm telling you now, if we don't fix it, if we don't change it, it will be unlike anything you could have ever imagined. And that's where we're going toward right now. China plays the long game. Right, we always think in short terms, because all of our leaders have 4 years to do it, right? In Justin Trudeau's case, he's had 9, right? And you know what I mean. But we always think short term, right? We think, okay, 5-year blocks. The Chinese think 50, 100-year terms, right? Like that's the way they think. That's Maoism. They think for the long stretch. So while we see all these Chinese cultural organizations pop up that are part of the United Front Work Department, which is a tentacle of the CCP, and we go, they're just hanging out playing mahjong, like it's no big deal. That was the attitude in Vancouver in the 90s. Well, look at us now, 30 years later, right? And that was a plan, that was a strategy that they were developing for those entire 30 years. Right? The plan and the strategy just gets passed back and forth between dictators in China. It's just it's a continuance of Mao's original strategy. The only difference is that you get moderates and you get hardliners. And so we're seeing this big dramatic push from China now because Xi Jinping is a hardliner. Right? He's as Mao was. The only difference is the technology exists, so he doesn't actually have to murder people. Right? He can just imprison them technologically.
All right. Well, thanks for the answer.
Sorry, Payman, that was really long. I took the long way around. Sorry, brother.
No, it's fine. There's no time limit here. What about? I'm gonna look at the parties as this coalition government is kind of imploding. I notice they're either doubling down or they're not softening their messaging. Like Jagmeet Singh is still banging on this. price gouging CEO, grocery store CEO drum. And yesterday, Chrystia Freeland came out with her. I cannot stand that woman's voice, but
Me
she was
neither.
talking about the one. Well, not she's like the 1%. No, the 0.0. She reads the teleprompter. 0.03% capital gains, and their buzz phrase is the next generation. Think about the new generation. Why are they not softening their message? Did they fire? Did the marketing team leave and they're just using the old notes?
I think that look, this is what happens when you're part of a cult, right? You become, the gap between yourself and regular society widens over time, right? It's why we're seeing this. I don't know if you've been paying attention, but we're seeing this sudden emergence of this bird flu. And that's, you see it all over the place, right? Now they're talking about rolling out vaccines for it. It's just that because they're ran by a an ideology that is religious in nature, right? Cultural Marxism is a religion. And so they're not unable, but unwilling to see beyond it. And so when you see Chrystia Freeland talking, right, or Justin Trudeau, or really anybody from the Liberal government, Mark Holland, any one of the puppets. I mean, myself personally, I can't stand Chrystia Freeland. To me, I call her the Penguin because that's what she looks like and that's how she sounds to me. The Penguin, I'm referencing Batman Returns, by the way, for the audience. But she's clearly lying in everything that she says, right? Like we've reached this point of supreme absurdity, right? Because everything they're saying is a lie. I mean, you can hold up the facts on a sheet of paper, right? And it's like they're lying. She's lying. But I think that they're at this point where they have no choice but to lie. What else are they going to do? Tell the truth? You know what I mean? Implicate themselves. So they have to lie. They have to stand there and pretend. And the result, or the consequence, of course, we saw earlier this week, Emmanuel Macron stepped down or lost in dramatic fashion in the EU, therefore called a snap election in France. Right. And that's where this all goes. It's just the question is, in Canada, are Canadians going to be as motivated as the French? Right. Because we have a history of being apathetic. So are we going to continue on with this apathy, or are we going to get busy like the French? Right. The thing that I always tell people, and this is going to sound very harsh, but you have to remind your elected leaders that the guillotine exists. It's right over there. We will take you there. It's the only thing that keeps them in line, right? Is that fear, right? And doesn't mean we're going to use it. Doesn't mean you're going to the guillotine. Just means that it's there. It's like back in the day, if you had very traditional parents, right? Dad would hang his belt where the kids could see it. It's the same psychology, right? Only difference is we're not traumatizing children. We're reminding our elected leaders that if you don't do the right thing, the guillotine's right there. And that's what keeps them at least somewhat honest. The problem is that we've taken that out of the picture now because we're civilized, or whatever you want to call it. So they're not really that afraid of that because they know that that's not an option. It'll never get there. Right. So, with them, they're just continuing on with the grift, with the scam, because they can, because we haven't done anything about it. So they'll stand there and Chrystia Freeland will give her little speech. Every press conference now, she's getting pressured about foreign interference. She doesn't even answer the question. Right. She just says, well, our so-and-sos have reviewed the case and have agreed to create new policy in order to, you know what I mean? It's just blah, 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 blah. She won't address it directly, right? Because she knows she's implicated in it, right? But she has no fear. There's no fear there. So she can just keep doing it as long as Canadians allow it.
No, I agree. I mean, they'll get away with whatever we will let them get away with.
That's it, right? The thing that we have to remember, and we've gotten away, over the years, we've started to view our elected officials as aristocrats, right? We've started to look at them as an aristocracy. These people are our employees, right? Like, imagine if you ran a business and the guy you employed was constantly taking stuff off the shelf and pushing it through the back door, selling it under the table, showing up late, not showing up at all, taking cash out of the register. Would they still be your employee? No. Well, that's who these people are. We elect them. Our tax dollars pay their salary, right? We're in a democracy. That's what a democracy is. These people are public servants. They're hired to represent us, right? But we've gotten away from that. Now we look at these people like they're gods. Like, oh, well, what can we do? Well, there's a lot we can do. We own this. We work, we pay taxes, we own it. We hired them. So we need to make sure that we're on top of that and that they're aware of that. And we're just not doing that part of the job. We're just sitting here letting them do whatever they want and hoping to stay out of the crosshairs.
Well, one of the things you touched on this earlier, but I used to be a very private person. I hate being behind the camera. But one of the things I like about podcasts, I talk to people like you. Mm-hmm. You have a different perspective, and it teaches me something. So I was talking to this other gentleman the other day about the Emergency Measures Act and how it was ruled unlawful by Justice Mosley. So most of us, we look at that, we're like, yeah, we won, right? And then, but there's the other side of it too. Lametti, David Lametti, he was the attorney to the government. He's supposed to advise the government on how to behave. And he basically gave the government instructions that turned out to be unlawful. And he's discredited. He should be disgraced, but he just got hired by another law firm. Like that, in a perfect society, first of all, he should be in jail. But if not, he should be disgraced. But we're not holding people accountable.
No, we're not. And you got to remember too, conspiracy theory alert, all these groups are connected, right? If anybody really wants to figure out what's going on, go and look into Power Corp. They're actually called Power Corp. They're a Montreal-based firm, and they are the ones who basically create the majority of the liberal policy. Just go look into them. I'm not going to go into a long rant here on that, but go look into them. See who they're connected to. And I think once you start to follow those connections, you'll get your answers as to what's really happening. Like David Lametti and all of them. Look, when Trudeau's done, it's not like he's going to go hide in a cave. He's going to go on to some position in the UN, or he'll sit on the board at some Canadian energy company, sustainable energy probably, right? But it's because these people are all connected to each other. All these power brokers. The only difference is this time we have a foreign government, a foreign regime that has its nails deep into these power circles. So they're the ones who are actually making the decisions at this point, right? And yeah, David Lametti, of course, that guy should be in prison without question, but they all should be. And I mean that, right? Every one of them that stood by while we were locked in our homes and while people lost everything. The other day I was reading, I don't know how true this number is, but apparently there were 220,000 businesses across Canada that shut down in the first year of lockdowns, right? I personally know 3 people that lost everything. All of those people should be held accountable. Every MP that voted yes should be held accountable, right? You hear a lot of people talking about Nuremberg 2, right? The return of the Nuremberg trials. Well, I think every country should hold their own. If we had a just system, if we were really a democracy, as we've come to learn that lockdowns were useless, masks had zero effect, right? As we've come to learn that the science behind all of this stuff was the opposite of what governments did, we should be launching investigations into every single MP and Justin Trudeau and his entire cabinet as to why this happened. And people who are found to have, done what they did because of corruption or because they were, there was something else happening, they should be put in prison, right? We have 11 sitting MPs. I'm going back to this. We have 11 people currently in our government who are proven to have worked on behalf of the CCP. They're still in our government. That's 11 votes on policy and legislation, right? It's 11 votes. And those are just the ones that we know. That's treason. You know what would have happened 100 years ago to those people? You and I both know. I don't have to say it. Right? They're still there. They're being protected by the Trudeau Liberals. Why? We shouldn't be allowing this under any circumstance, but they're still there, voting on legislation every single day that will impact your life and my life for the foreseeable future. Right?
I guess we're wrapping it up, but like, do you get the sense that Canadians couldn't care less that their politicians are committing treason?
I get the sense that mainstream Canadians don't, because they don't understand what it means. We live in a fantasy world, right? We've been allowed to live in a fantasy world for the last, 50, 60 years. We've lived in a fairy tale. That's why, Canadians are apathetic because, like I said, they've been afforded the luxury, right? Like, ask your dad, hey, dad, when Islamic fundamentalists were, taking hold in your country, did you just watch TV? Did you turn on Netflix? Right? He left, right? We've never been faced with a scenario like that. We're walking into one, but we have been afforded the luxury of being apathetic and unaware and ignorant for a very long time. So I don't think it's not that Canadians don't want to know, or I should say it's not that Canadians don't know, it's that they don't want to know, because it hasn't impacted them yet. It hasn't hurt them yet, but it will. It's coming, right? And so I think that's the problem. The problem is just that we've never experienced a revolution. We've never experienced major upheaval. We've never experienced collapse, right? I mean, we did a little bit during COVID, right? A lot of people lost a lot, right? But, we haven't had a situation where the entire world falls apart around us, right? And that's what I think it is. I just think that we live in a fairy tale, and we've been living in a bubble for a very long time, and that bubble is about to pop.
Well, Jason, I guess we started out with immigration, and then we hit everything until we finally got to treason. I don't think we can get any worse than treason, except maybe genocide. So let's just stop it there.
Payman, it is always an honor, and thank you for listening to my ramblings. And for your audience, I just want to say this: I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm not a guy who just reads things on the internet and then parrots them. Right? I'm a podcaster myself. I have my podcast. I make sure that I'm well researched, that I read everything that I'm talking about, and that I really dig into it. Right? And unless somebody can prove otherwise, and maybe they can. Not disputing that, maybe somebody can change my mind on things. All of the stuff that I've said here today has been parsed through in my mind with careful consideration, right? I don't just say things. So, I know a lot of this stuff sounds crazy and it sounds like conspiracy theories, and I wish they were. I wish we were still in a place where Alex Jones was screaming in the distance about, reptilians from another dimension controlling Hillary Clinton. I wish that was our reality, right? Because it's easy for us to just dismiss it, but we can't dismiss it anymore. And that's my message to the audience. Please just go and pick any of the threads that I left here, or just go and do your own reading.
And Jason, where can people follow you, or maybe do a plug for Sam Cooper's social media?
Sure. Yeah. You can follow me on X, Jason James BNN. You can follow me on Substack, bravenewnormal.substack.com. That's kind of like the hub for all my work, all my writing. I am not a journalist, by the way. I am an essayist and a screenwriter. However, Sam Cooper is a journalist. And if you want to read his reporting, you can go to thebureau.news. Or you can follow him on X at Scooper Cooper. Sam Sam has a brilliant book called Willful Blindness, which kind of was the launch pad for a lot of the reporting that he's doing now. And there's an upcoming congressional hearing in the United States on the Winnipeg Biolab. And a lot of Sam's report is the basis for that hearing. And a lot of Sam's reporting is now being referenced by the Pentagon. So that's how serious his work is, and how seriously he's being taken. So, yeah, it's just time to wake up, folks. We can get out of this. We just got to do it together, all of us, no matter what color or gender or whatever you are. We got to do it together.
Jason, it's a wonderful message to end on. Thank you very much for coming on.
Oh, Payman, anytime, my brother. I'm just so happy you're out there. You're such a brilliant dude. I'm happy you had the courage to step in front of the camera.
Don't let me stop you. Keep going. You're doing good.
No, dude. I in preparation for these talks, I always go back and listen to like stuff that you've recently put out or conversations you've recently had, and you're such an important voice, man. I'm glad you're doing what you're doing, and I wish you nothing but the most success. And I look forward to our future conversations together.
Thank you very much, sir. Have a wonderful day.
You too, man.